When you start doing evil and sin and flipping this, it will lead to mental instability. Now, this is a big deal in America right now, and I just want you to know the farther we get away from God, the harder it's going to be to figure this out. This last week, there was an interview, a Senate hearing, and Professor Bridges, she's a professor at University of Berkeley, and she's acting as a professional witness here about the subject of life and the sanctity of life and so forth. Well, I want you to hear what she says, because the last several weeks, I'm seeing this over and over and over and over again as the rationale for certain laws to be put into place where we're calling evil good and good evil. Listen to these words.
Professor Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing that.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm denying that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So
pregnant.
you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. Now, there's a lot of things I could talk about there. But as I was listening, she mentioned transphobic, if you ask any questions. And I was pondering this week. It's really a misnomer. I was thinking about how, bless the professor, but she's really theophobic. You understand what I'm saying? Afraid of God. And yet, that's really not the case, because the fear of the Lord always leads us to do what is good, not that which is evil. Anyways, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but think about it. It will, I promise. Violence, she mentions violence. How many of you know there's always been violent people in the world? Let me just ask you a question. How many of you were bullied before the word bully was used? Yeah, all of us. If you're gray here, I can promise you were. There's always been evil people. How far do you have to read in the Bible to find out that a brother can kill a brother? The 4th chapter of Genesis. The first 2 chapters are on creation. The 3rd chapter is about how mom and dad sin against God. The 4th chapter, all of a sudden we jump in and it's a brother killing a brother. There's always going to be violence. But I want you to jump to this, though, because I'm hearing this over and over, and what I don't want you to be is seduced. I don't want you to be seduced with this. And the rationale is that we would call that which is evil good and that which is good evil, and we would switch these two. And quite honestly, the intent's good, because we don't want anybody to commit suicide. How many of you know that suicide is a sin? All of you look at me. Do not commit suicide. Go ahead, turn to someone. Don't commit suicide. Seriously, friends, this is so important. God says you shall not murder. Suicide is self-murder. All right? It's a sin against God. Don't do it. But what's happening is, if the good professor was here, I would ask her, look back in history and see how these students and how others had better mental health where they were not committing suicide when we told them they were boys and girls and not some sort of, we don't know what you are. It's consistent. It's very consistent. And what I want you to see with me is this, is that there are 3 basic things for mental health. The first one is this: you got to do what's good. God is speaking here. He's speaking to Cain and Abel. To Cain. He's already killed Abel. And he says, if you do what? Well, will not your countenance be lifted up? In other words, won't you have better mental health? That's exactly what he's saying. We're just using different terms there. Won't your mental health be better if you do what is good? Yeah. My grandma used to say that to me. Look, Mark, if you do what's right, you'll feel better about it afterwards. How many of you, be honest for just a second, a pizza was come and put on the table. You're on a diet and you know you should only have one slice. You eat half the pizza and then you go, ha! I might as well eat the whole thing, and you ate the whole thing. I mean, confess. Right? And then afterwards, did you feel good or bad about eating the whole pizza? Right? Sin is the same way. It's like it takes us a little farther, and what happens is in the end, it brings depression. It just does. That's just part of it. In fact, as I've spent the last 30 years walking with Jesus, and I've read through the Bible, I've noticed in meeting with thousands of people, there's at least 3 significant things in the Bible about your mental health. If you want to have good mental health, first one is do what is right. Do what is right. It leads to good mental health. Don't abandon your family. That leads to good mental health. Real men protect others. It leads to good mental health. Recognize that God is seated in the heavens, and as a result, he speaks authoritatively into my life, and so therefore I do what he says rather than what culture says or what lawyers say. I do what he says, and guess what? It brings mental health. There's another one, and that's hearing the Bible itself. Psalms 19, verse 7 says, the law of the Lord is perfect, not half perfect, but perfect. The way it says it in the New Testament, all scripture inspired by God and profitable for teaching. The way Jesus said it, thy word is truth. So if you don't know what is true and perfect and God breathed, you got to look to the Bible. But as you look in the Bible, it goes on in verse 7 there and says, the law of the Lord is perfect and it restores the soul. What does that mean? It brings mental health to us. And I can just tell you from my past, and I've shared this with you, if it wasn't for Jesus, I would be locked up in jail right now having murdered people or have already killed myself. I'm just telling you that's the truth. Do what is right, and it leads to good mental health. Hear the promises of God, the faithfulness of God, the forgiveness of God. Some of us are sitting there, maybe you're online right now, going, you just don't know what I've done. I don't know what you've done, but God does, and Jesus died, and his death's sufficient. Don't lose your mind. Trust in God. You say, well, the world's falling apart, and, what about economics and stuff? Yeah, it's falling apart. Friends, you better hold on to God. This week, I shared it. I put it on YouTube this week. Listen, do not put your trust in the uncertainty of riches, but God. Where do you find that? In the Bible, 1 Timothy 6. So you need the promises of God. You need the character of God. You need the faithfulness of God. This is where you're going to find it. His mercy is new every day. The book of Lamentations. And then, ultimately, as you're doing this, you're really looking to the God of heaven himself. See, you and I aren't big enough to be God. We're not powerful enough to be God. We're not sufficient to be God. And that's what the world keeps telling us. We diminish God. We got this tiger by the tail, and we say, oh, we're going to defang him. We're going to take his claws away, and we're going to elevate you. Really? Really? Think about that. Psalm 3, verse 3. Let me just read you this passage. It says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, the one who lifts my head. Lifting your head is an archaic expression of lifting your countenance, your mental health being restored. How many of you have ever been depressed and you're like walking around like Eeyore, right? God is the one who restores us. Psalm 34, verse 18, listen to this. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in their spirit. There's nothing left, friends. We got to look to the living God. Or Psalm 51, when David sins with Bathsheba. I mean, he's already broken. He didn't do what was right. He didn't pay attention to the scriptures, and he sins against God. And in Psalm 51, verse 12, he cries out to God, restore unto me the joy of my salvation. Why did he lose his joy? Because he diminished God. He defanged God. He took God down and raised himself, and he did what he wanted to. And as a result of that, he lost the joy. Lose the joy, go into depression. And so he prays, restore unto me the joy of my salvation. If you read the previous verses, he confesses his sin, that he had the sin with Bathsheba, and it has this adulterous affair. And it says, sustain me with a willing spirit. You see, idols will never give you good mental health, but the living God does. And we can go through scriptures and show this over and over and over again. So there's tremendous depression in this passage. The bottom line is they had a tiger by the tail, and they didn't honor God the way that he should have been honored. Friends, fight the depression. Do what is right. Hear what God says, and seek his grace.